Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund event on the sidelines of the United Nations Security Council Open Debate on Women, Peace and Security. Today we're highlighting the urgent need to amplify the voices and the support for women working on the front lines of conflict and the crisis. First, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Hayat Mershad. I'm the Executive Director of Female and a proud WPHF civil society partner from Lebanon. Unfortunately, while we are speaking today about women, peace and security, Lebanon is witnessing an exchange of gunfire and armed conflict since early morning in our capital, Beirut. I can say that we are witnessing patriarchy at its best, violence at its best. Until this moment, more than 6 people were killed and at least 30 were injured. The clashes involved snipers, bullets, shooting, bombs, rockets, etc. And that's why I think it is important now and every day to speak more and raise the voice more on women's role in peace building and the importance of supporting women on the front lines to make change in their countries, in different places all over the world. And it is my honor to moderate today's expert panel of women civil society leaders joining us today from Nigeria, Palestine, and Afghanistan to help drive awareness of the crucial roles that local women's organizations play in conflict and the crisis settings, and also the urgent need, as I mentioned, to support their efforts to build the peace and respond to humanitarian emergencies. Also, please allow me to give a special thanks to the governments of Germany, Canada, Ireland, and the International Civil Society Action Network, ICAN, and also the Global Partnership for the Prevention of Armed Conflict for co-hosting our event today. This event is being live streamed on Facebook. Also, I would like to invite people following the conversation on social media to be sure to add the hashtag event 1000 women leaders, and also to use WPHF handles in their tweets and in their comments. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Her Excellency Ambassador Antje Lindertje, Permanent Representative of Germany to the United Nations, for her opening remarks. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Hayat, and also let me say that we are all, of course, following the situation in Beirut, and we hope for early, for soon de-escalation and that there will be no victims. It's ongoing. It started yesterday, and now, I'm sorry that we have to start with this issue, but we are with you. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, during the 21 years of the WPS agenda, we have come a long way so far. And it is now universally recognized that women are an integral part of peace building and peacekeeping, and that their participation in peace processes is indispensable. But a lot of work has been done on the normative framework of the WPS agenda, but there is also the implementation question. And Germany contributed to advancing a rights-based, participative and survivor-centered approach. We tried so, notably by putting forward Security Council Resolution 2467. Nevertheless, we also have said for years altogether, what is needed is real implementation, as I said. The WPHF delivers on this goal. WPHF is a unique instrument at our hands to strengthen women's organizations and to strengthen female leadership through concrete projects. In Germany this year, we adopted a new national action plan and put into practice concrete measures to mainstream WPS. For example, by establishing WPS focal points in German missions abroad who secure an integrated and inclusive approach. We strive for the systematic participation of women mediators, women peace builders, and gender experts in peace negotiations and mediation support. We work as catalytic member in the Women, Peace and Humanitarian Action Compact within the framework of the Generation Equality Forum. We are really proud to support the African Women Leaders Network and to be working with UN Women, the African Union, and the AU Envoy on Women, Peace and Security, Bineta Diop. Germany is one of the major donors of the WPHF and has contributed 13.6 million euros so far. But it is not our commitment, the only commitment to the WPHF. This has to go beyond the financial contribution. We are honored to be part of its funding board since 2021 and actively participate in shaping its work on the ground. Supporting the role of women in peace building and conflicts was a priority of our latest term on the Security Council and will continue to be a key issue of our foreign policy in the coming years. This is why we are proud to announce to pledge 5 million euros to support the WPHF's work in Afghanistan, 2 million, Lebanon and Sudan. And we are making available up to another additional 6 million now for the WPHF to react on the situation in Afghanistan. I think this is very important. With the help of the new funding, WPHF wants to reach out to Afghan women who have left the country in the light of the new situation. And I will now try to name only a few examples of concrete implementation projects we are trying to support. I start with Afghanistan. There we support the UN Women Protection Center Trust Fund for Afghanistan with 500,000 euros. This is to create safe spaces for women in Afghanistan. We think it's crucial to protect them and mitigate the consequences of violence. In Colombia, my second example, WPHF is working to enable women's meaningful participation in the implementation of the peace agreement and to ensure women's active engagement in the country's peace building and recovery efforts. And my last example is Burundi. The WPHF established a nationwide network of women mediators in 2016 already. And this has really proven effective in preventing violence at the local level, hampering the possibility of spillover into wider tensions. These examples I gave highlight that including women in peace processes and negotiation is not just optional, it is a prerequisite for the long-term success of any peace agreement, and strengthening women's roles in conflict resolutions remains our shared endeavor. Let us continue to do this work jointly, and I thank you for the attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for Germany's leadership and committed support for the WPHF and also local women's civil society worldwide. As you mentioned, indeed, the support for women on the front lines need not to be optional because they have a big role in preventing violence and playing a role to do the best that they can do in building lasting peace for all. Thank you again. We will now turn to Her Excellency Jacqueline O'Neill, Ambassador for Women, Peace and Security of Canada. Ambassador O'Neill, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Hayat. Merci. And as our German colleague just said, we are all thinking of you right now in Lebanon and hoping that this violence ends immediately. And we are all incredibly impressed by your personal resolve to fulfill your commitment to us, even when facing this personal danger. And as you said, it's just a horrible reminder that this work is needed more urgently than ever. So thank you for being with us. Bonjour à tous et à toutes. C'est un grand plaisir d'être ici avec vous d'Ottawa, Canada. It's a pleasure to join you from the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. And I'm delighted to join my colleagues from Germany and from Ireland, all our partners in civil society, and particularly to hear from several women peace builders. A colleague sent me the run of show yesterday, and he said, I think you'll be very happy because the women peace builders are speaking for more than double the time that you ambassadors will be talking. And I thought that's exactly how it should be. So I will be sure to be very brief and contribute to that very healthy ratio. So I want to say, Canada is just such a proud supporter, an original supporter of this fund dating back to 2016. And we're very pleased to have our quite committed colleague, Krista House, sitting on the board. We aim to support women peace builders through this fund, but also directly through streams, dedicated streams that we have run by our department. And it's because we have this determination, I think we can say very deeply that we understand the point that we hear again and again from leaders in civil society, which is that funding is a very core part of a feminist foreign policy. And that funding is much more than just the amount of money spent, but how easily people can access the money. And all of our governments need, as a minimum, the will to more predictably and more quickly get money to community-based peace builders so that you can spend it in the way that you know best. And we also know that just the will to do that alone doesn't change everything, because we all work in systems where it's just simply not easy to move money in that way. And we're usually facing internal systems that have been set up over decades, and often by parliamentarians and others who created laws and requirements aimed at being responsible stewards of taxpayers' money. And we know that getting money in the hands of women peace builders is the right and the strategic thing to do, and we need to evolve these big systems. But something that's true for Canada, I think, is also true for many other countries, which is that it's hard to create systems, but it's easier once there are examples and precedents of things that have worked well. And that's one of the many reasons we're grateful for this fund, because it helps get money out the door to those who need it most. And also it helps kind of train us as donors and give us as donors experience in funding in different ways, and funding more diverse groups, and diversifying our funding, and building relationships with really tremendous women and women's organizations and women-led movements around the world. This is absolutely the way of the future. So we are very happy to support this fund. We're eager to bring in more supporters in this movement, including for the 1,000 Leaders campaign and so much more. We want to thank all of the organizers at this fund, and to all those especially who are working to build peace in your own communities. Thanks so much. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Your Excellency, and also special thanks to Canada for its generous support of the WPHF, and also for the efforts of local women leaders on the front lines. I now would like to introduce our final government speaker, Her Excellency Ambassador Geraldine Byrne Nason, Permanent Representative of Ireland to the United Nations. Ambassador Nason, over to you.
Thank you indeed, dear Hyatt. And before I begin my remarks, just to say how much you are with us in your thoughts. You yourself used the term a moment ago, women in the front line, and with the news reports we're seeing and hearing from Beirut this morning, our thoughts here in New York very definitely with you and all your colleagues. We hope you stay safe, and as colleagues have said to you already, following hour by hour developments. On an upbeat note, great to be joined up with everyone online this morning, morning in New York, and I know women across the globe at different times of the day. Fantastic to come together to discuss issues of women, peace and security. It's actually a great month, October here at the UN. As you know, we know it as our month. It's a time for celebration and action. Each year we mark that momentous achievement, and it really is a momentous achievement of Resolution 1325. The result, of course, in itself of decades of advocacy and activism that was pioneered by the women peace builders and their sisters that we will hear from as we go on today in our discussions. But with all that celebration and marking of that momentous achievement, I have to say that we're also very clear-eyed here in New York, and we recognize that we need to confront the reality that the WPS agenda absolutely still lacks the kind of funding that's needed to fully realize its potential. We see the figures time and again, and the earlier speakers have referred to it, despite the extraordinary, and I would say that extraordinary efficacy of women's groups globally on the ground, the work of women's groups remains shamefully, I would say, underfunded and under-resourced. And depressingly, if predictably, this is at a time when social spending is under pressure. We know that. In part, but in large part due to the result of the pandemic. And the Secretary General's latest report on WPS notes very clearly that global military and defense expenditure is rising at that time when resources are under such pressure. I see that as really being to the detriment of our societies and our communities. Frankly, the contrast really couldn't be more stark. And as an international community, I think we have to step back and ask ourselves, what are we doing? And frankly, where do our priorities lie? For Ireland, the country I'm proud to represent here, investing in women peace builders and leaders is absolutely essential for the full implementation of this critical agenda that we share as much as a vocation as a mission, I'll say. I mean, it's not just the right thing to do, but it's a good investment. We say that to each other all the time. This has to be, however, more than about speeches, more than rhetoric. So in Ireland, we're certainly advancing our long-standing partnership with Women, Peace and Humanitarian Fund, as you know. And recently at the Generation Equality Forum, we were delighted to announce a pledge of $1.5 million over the next 5 years. That's something we want to do. It's something that we also hope will reinforce the support we give to the 1,000 Women Leaders campaign. It's a fantastic initiative that, to me, reinforces the real role of grassroots women, the key role, I should say, of grassroots women and the peace building role they play in ensuring, and I want to emphasize this, in ensuring lasting solutions to conflict. In Ireland, in 2020, we commissioned a global network of women peace builders and UN women to conduct a series of consultations with local women peace builders from right across Colombia, Ireland, South Africa, and Uganda. And the subsequent report showed the ongoing challenges that we have in hand for this implementation of the WPS. I think that's been made more acute, as I said, by the pandemic. So we're looking forward to continuing to champion and to work alongside WPHF in our role as a board member of the Compact on Women, Peace, Security and Humanitarian Action. And I'll close now saying that as an elected member of the Security Council, we've made it a top priority at the Security Council to ensure that the voices and the recommendations of women civil society leaders are in the room and at the table, that they're amplified and heard, and importantly heeded. It was one of our key goals in the month we just finished, September, as president of the Security Council. We invited a record number of women's civil society briefers to the council. We're now delighted to be part of a trio of presidencies, starting with Ireland, now in Kenya, and moving to Mexico, that will carry forward this prioritization of women, peace and security. It goes hand in hand with our wider work on gender and WPS. We are ensuring that the gender perspective is front and central in every single file that comes to the attention of the Security Council in our role as co-chair with Mexico of the informal expert group on WPS. So I'll finish up by saying the truth is, we all know here in New York that the work on WPS doesn't happen in our safe bubble on the East River. It happens on the ground where women peace builders are. Throughout September, we were humbled and moved by the grit and the determination of the women peace builders who came to the Security Council and briefed us. I very, very much look forward to hearing from more of our peace builders today, and to tell you that Ireland keeps faith with this agenda every single day at the table of the Security Council. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Your Excellency, and also a special thanks to Ireland for its feminist presidency of the UN Security Council this past month, and also its strong commitment to local women peace builders and advancing the women peace and security agenda. I would like also to thank all our government speakers for your leadership and generous support again for WPHF, and also for all the solidarity expressed with Lebanon, Afghanistan, and all women living under these unfortunate crises and circumstances. Let us now transition to the next phase, for me, it will be a very interesting phase of our event, and to hear directly insights from local women peace builders, humanitarians, and the human rights defenders around the world. As I already mentioned, as a feminist activist myself, coming from Lebanon, a country that, as I already mentioned, has witnessed financial meltdown that has swiftly worsened in the last month with political, if I can say, problems and political conflicts taking care and tensions in the country, and also the Beirut explosion that I think you've heard about on the 4th of August on 2020, which killed at least 218 people and damaged the heart of the capital, Beirut, and the unfortunate recent events that I spoke about that are taking place in Lebanon. For me, I would like to stress that we as feminist movement, women's rights movement, and activists, we are always among the first to respond and to be on the front lines to every crisis. For example, recently in Lebanon, we at Female and many other partners, we are working with the Women Peace and the Humanitarian Fund in order to ensure that the voices of women and girls are amplified and are heard, and their stories are taken into considerations, and also their priorities in the decision-making process after the Beirut explosion. But also I want to mention that although we play a critical role, as many of our speakers has emphasized, but in every crisis, unfortunately, we are excluded mainly from decision making and from the humanitarian funding. I can give a quick example here. For example, in Lebanon, the local and national organizations have so far directly received less than 0.6% of the humanitarian funding for COVID-19, for example, response plan. For me, I want to end with a message and say that to drive the most effective, inclusive and sustainable response possible, this needs to change. And as trusted community leaders and also local experts, we must be included in decisions that will help shape our country's future. And also we need to be able to access more direct and flexible and long-term sustainable funding. These are the main messages I wanted to emphasize based on my experience as a feminist activist from Lebanon. And I would like to turn now to the first speaker among our expert panel speakers today, Husna Ibrahim. Husna is the Director of Women and Youth Empowerment Initiative in Nigeria, a civil society organization that empowers women and girls to build peace in their communities by preventing and responding to SGBV cases that impede women's full participation in peace and recovery efforts. Husna, I would like to ask you about the current conflict, how this current conflict and violent extremism situation is impacting women and girls in Nigeria, and why is it important to support the work of local organizations like yours?
Okay, thank you very much, Hayat, and thank you, Your Excellency, for the remarks. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, because I'm really honored to be here in your midst. To take that straight, it is no longer news that the decade-long armed conflict in the Northeast Nigeria has significant. This often puts women in different and difficult positions outside their usual domestic roles that they are used to during the peace time. Even though women face a lot of societal problems, this hikes during conflict, because conflicts and crises always affect women in their different ways, and thereby endangering them the more.
Husna, you are muted. Husna? Sorry, we are unable to hear you. Yes,
hello, are you
it's
hearing
working
me
now? Yes, go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. So the context here is that some women were abducted against their will, while some joined and to escape their social conditions, which could be searched from maybe insecurity, marginalization, poverty, etc. So the decade-long insurgency has caused gender-specific suffering. Yes, of course, men were specifically killed and disproportionately killed, women and girls, on the other hand, constitute a proportion of internally continue to suffer these consequences. And a substantial proportion of them who are displaced also suffer SGBV of different sorts. And there is another angle of stigmatization. For example, women and girls who were former slaves or slave wives or fighters who have often faced with reintegration problems, in part because the lines between militants, sympathizers, and forced accomplices are highly very thin. You cannot really differentiate them by mere seeing, except if a thorough understanding of these experiences are done. Only so with the conflict will be understood very well. And not only that they are only victims, but they also become actors, and this their needs will have to be, they matter a lot. And directly, this could inform decisions that will be taken in programming and how to tackle all the problems associated with these insurgencies and strategies for coping the insurgencies, as well as facilitating women's contributions to the lasting. So you see, women and girls' protection needs, though of utmost priority to the humanitarian organizations in this area and even the CSOs, it has been significantly impacted by insurgency. Displaced women and girls are already at a disadvantaged stage, and they are vulnerable. And so this action threatens their protection more. There are the major victims of abuses and other acts of aggression. Additionally, because of, are you here? Are you hearing me? Because my network is having a little
yes, we're hearing you.
Problem. Yes. So I was saying that they need protection against manipulation, sexual exploitation, abuses, and protection against discrimination in the delivery of goods and services. However, because of the humanitarian crisis, these basic protection rights hardly come easily to women and girls. Thus, their suffering is always unbearable, and women continue to suffer the impact of these insurgencies. And I must tell you, it's better heard than experienced. So to better do things right, funding for women-led organizations is paramount, as it is, permit me to say, the very good thing to do, which also amounts to putting the round pegs in the round hole. Aside from the fact that these organizations have better understanding of women and girls' needs, like my organization that is already doing the WPHF project. And we are really equipped, and we know our people better, and we can really impact in this context for women and girls better. Though the capacities of these women organizations, women-led, might be very low, which could be improved through takes to empower women.
Thank you, Husna. Yeah, I think we've lost Husna. So thank you, Husna, for your intervention. And I can say that undoubtedly conflicts and the crisis emphasize the urgent protection needs. Husna?
Hello, I'm being heard. Share is about intervention, they can interrelate, and they.
Thank you, Husna.
Hello, am I there? Or the network is off?
Yes, thank you, Husna. Your time is over. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. So I was saying that these conflicts and the crisis emphasize the urgent protection needs of women and girls. And also they are often, because they are often the ones who pay the highest price of conflicts and instabilities. And unfortunately, the first whose rights are ignored or deprioritized. Thank you again. Now we will move to Ayat Kanaan. Ayat is a feminist, young feminist, joining us today on behalf of Reform, a Palestinian organization working on increasing women's and girls' meaningful participation in conflict prevention in Ramallah. Ayat, I would like you to tell us about the repercussions you are seeing of this multi-layered crisis in Palestine and its impact on women and girls, particularly the effects of their exclusion from community level, national, and also international peace efforts.
Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for this opportunity to speak today. What I did want to say is that the situation of women in Palestine is very complex, it's very multi-layered. The women participation was at its peak during the 80s, more in the Palestinian community, and this was due to the Palestinian men becoming more involved in the political lives, and they did not have the time to work. So this led the women to have more of a work life. They were the ones who were farming, and they were the ones who were promoting their products for a living. Now, after the Palestinian Authority was formed in 1993, there was a paradigm shift in the Palestinian society, and it consisted of men who were previously involved in politics becoming the ones who were producing the products. So consequently, there was a retreat of women because of the men. They were able to be more occupying that space, and they lost their income, the women did. In addition, after 1993, there was a rise in the Islamic politics, which propelled the traditional roles with limited roles for women. The Palestinian society lost the involvement of women in the public sphere and their contributions. So we as Palestinian women carry the burdens of the occupation and severe limitations on movement, tribalism, and traditional social norms, where women are assumed to be in household positions. This caused Palestinian women to be rarely included in formal peace talks or decision-making, whether at the local, national, or international levels. Even within their own households, women are excluded. Women's participation in peace building and conflict prevention efforts in Palestine is further impeded by the lack of laws that protect them from violence, their limited access to safe spaces, or adequate services. Women just basically do not feel protected. The fear for their security and safety makes them feel that they cannot actively take part in peace efforts or be involved in their community's affairs, not because they do not have the ability, but because they have the lack of protection services. Fear is what is holding women back, and not protecting women enough is obstructing any peace opportunities. Yet informally, behind closed doors, young Palestinian women are always discussing peace and conflict resolution amongst each other. They are the ones who are leading the informal peace initiatives and often are informally preventing and responding to local conflicts. Young women want to make a difference. They often fear, though, that they are being boldly represented would increase their exposure to violence, and it will propel honor crime threats. And thus, their efforts to build the peace and prevent conflict in their localities often go unnoticed. So often, the safe dialogue spaces are all that is needed to enhance women's participation in peace, conflict prevention, and response initiatives. We notice that women from different regions face difficult conflict realities. When they do participate in conflict prevention, they bring a voice that is experienced and they put forward effective and local solutions. They can easily identify the issues that need to be dealt with, and they understand the complex situations in their particular regions. In addition, women in Palestine bring their own experience and perspectives of conflicts and can prevent and respond to them through gender-sensitive approaches. No one can do this in their place. So for example, with our work in Reform and the WCPHP project, we trained 40 young women on how to use the early warning system to highlight issues that impact their lives and report conflicts in their communities. Under our WPHF funded project, we're also providing those safe spaces where women can speak up, voice their needs, and provide solutions to prevent and respond to conflict in their communities. Our early warning mechanism is more than just reporting the conflicts. It's about amplifying their voices from the local to the national level, putting them in contact with local decision makers, and providing them the opportunity to network and be part of the change. It's not an us versus them dynamic, but it's building the trust, bringing them together because we are all involved. We included men in the project, and we established partnerships between the community-based organizations, the government of Hebron, and the police to collaborate together. Based on the early warning mechanism system and after analyzing all the civil peace violations that were reported, we would like to draft a policy paper with practical recommendations on how to better include women in peace efforts, and we shared it with the Ministries of Women's and Social Affairs, and we engaged young women in social and political interactions with men and decision makers in general that will de-escalate gender-based violence. This demonstrates how rights are being violated and encourages more responsive policies to women's needs. So I'm very proud of our project and how we are able to address the multi-layered conflict that we have and we face as women in Palestine every day.
Thank you, Ayat, for the intervention. And we are also proud of young women like you who are leading the change and insisting on keeping the efforts of women noticed and not unnoticed. Thank you again. As many of us know, the recent devastating events in Afghanistan brought to the forefront the increasing pushback on women's rights and the grave risks that women human rights defenders face. Women human rights defenders are and have been key actors for advancing peace and gender equality in Afghanistan over the past 2 decades. And today they are facing increased threats and risks of retaliation because of the very nature of their vital work on ground. Joining us today is Zarka Yaftali. Zarka is a woman human rights defender from Afghanistan and the director of the Women and Children Legal Research Foundation. Zarka, you are welcome, and I would like you to tell us more about women human rights defenders' efforts to foster inclusive peace and gender equality over the past 2 decades in Afghanistan, despite all the risks you are witnessing. At what costs do they continue to stand up for women's rights from inside and outside the country today?
Thank you so much, Hayat, and thanks from all team of WPHF for all of their support and also commitment regarding to gender equality and women peace security issue, and also thanks from all excellency ambassadors for raising and sharing their support to WPS agenda in different countries. I am very happy that I am going to raise the situation of women HRDs and also women peacebuilders in Afghanistan, and how was our achievement during the past 2 decades, and we are and today we are. Unfortunately, when I am talking today with you, we are in a situation that all women, especially women HRD, they lost all of the things that we had. We lost all of the achievement and gains that achieved during the past 2 decades with lots of struggles, hard work, and we unfortunately lost all of this achievement very easily. And during the past 2 decades, women HRDs and women which were in the front line, they did a lot. We did a lot for women political participation. We did a lot for gender equality, and also we did a lot for women participation in the peace process of Afghanistan. And it was not just the thing that we did. We had lots of achievement. We brought lots of change in the situation of women in Afghanistan, especially in situation on those women that they had need. We had a constitution. Woman was a member of drafting committee of the constitution, that on that constitution there wasn't any discrimination between men and women in Afghanistan. There was equal opportunity for a woman and men for access to education, access to work, political participation, economic participation and also cultural participation. We tried a lot, and we provide the space for women political participation. We had a percentage of women in the Parliament of Afghanistan. We had a percentage of women in the Provisional Council of Afghanistan. We had 4 women at the government leadership of Afghanistan. We had women as ambassadors for women, peace and security agenda. We have done lots of research, lots of advocacy and lobby for women meaningful participation in the peace process, not just at the national level, even at the provisional level. We had the National Action Plan for implementation of 1325 resolution, and we tried a lot to have we provide a safe space for women in all of the area. We had 4 women in the negotiation team of Afghanistan, and they were those women that they were the representative of Afghanistan women to negotiate with the Taliban and to share the concern and also recommendation of Afghanistan with the Taliban. And also we had 10 women in the High Council for National Reconciliation that they were involved in the decision making regarding to the peace and the security issue of Afghanistan. So we had 30% of women in the leadership of civil service in Afghanistan, that they were in the leadership. We had the women in the leadership of our security and institution in the Afghanistan, that they were in the leadership. So in all aspects of the country, we had women in the different parts of the country, and we tried a lot to provide more opportunity for implementation of 1325 resolution and also for implementation of National Action Plan that we had. But unfortunately, when I'm talking with you, fixed 2 months ago from today, we lost all of this achievement, and all of achievement we lost very dramatically, all of the achievement that we had. I was member of High Council for National Reconciliation, and we with all the group, we were involved for drafting of some policies and also for TWAR, that how we can manage and how we can end the war of Afghanistan, and then how we can establish an inclusive government with the participation of all people of Afghanistan. And we didn't thought about coming of this day. We didn't thought about that the government will be fall and Taliban will come back by force. Unfortunately, it happened. The government fall and Taliban come back to Afghanistan. And unfortunately, as now the Taliban saying that they change, and some of their the persons that they are lobbying Taliban and the international level, they are saying that Taliban changed. Taliban have not changed. They are the Taliban that they were in 1996 and 2001, and now they are violating more than 20 years ago on women. Now, as I am talking with you, unfortunately, in my country, in Afghanistan, our daughters, our sisters, and our girls don't have the right to go to school. Taliban closed all of school for girls students, and they just allowing girls under at grade 6, and they are not allowing girls to go to secondary and high school. Today, when I am talking with you, unfortunately, all women in my country, they didn't have the permission to work. All of women, maybe we had more than 2 million women that they work in the different areas, and government and institution, and also in non-government organization. But today they have lost their work, and they are without income. And how, unfortunately, we have lots of cases that families, mothers, and also women are selling their kids for providing of some monies, for some income for themselves. If all of us think it is very difficult for a mother, for a woman, when we are thinking about our kids, that if they will be sick, that how it will be the situation that our parents are deciding that they sell their kids to provide and to to gain some money to be alive for other member of the family. Today, unfortunately, there isn't any allow for women. One of the achievements that we had during the past 2 decades, it was the establishment of a Ministry of Women Affairs. Unfortunately, Taliban closed this ministry, and it means that they are not accepting women. They are not accepting women as a human in the country. So if we think that they are respecting women, they are providing women's rights for them, I think it is very funny. And they closed the Ministry of Women Affairs. We did the Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission office in Kabul and also in the Sam province of Afghanistan. Unfortunately, they closed all of this office. So it means that there isn't any news regarding the situation of human rights in Afghanistan, and also regarding to democratic values in Afghanistan. And unfortunately, today we have nothing. And regarding to the support of international community in the past decades, and regarding to achievement that we had in the past decades, I honestly, it was not happen. The achievement that we had, it will be not happen if we didn't had the support of international community. Some institutions, some organizations, some countries, like some programs like WPHF, that they supported women in the different areas to provide the space for women participation in all areas that today, unfortunately, we didn't have it.
Thank you, Zarka. Thank you for inspirational intervention, and kudos to you and all the women who are on the front lines, fighting back the pushback and trying to bring back peace and rights and dignity for all people, and especially women and girls in your country. Thank you again. And we know that as women advocating for women peace and security and also gender equality, we are challenging the political status quo and often going against the traditional and social beliefs. We continue to face different kinds of oppositions in our everyday work. So I want to get back to our speakers, Husna, Ayat, and Zarka, and I would like to ask you, please, each one of you to answer in 3 minutes. What are the main challenges faced by local women's organizations and women's leaders in your communities? And if today, right after this event, we would change things for more support for women working on the front lines of peace and humanitarian action, what should be the practical next steps in your opinion? What do you want to ask the international community? Let's start with Husna Ibrahim. Husna, you have 3 minutes, please, to answer this question.
Okay, thank you very much again to have me back here, talking about what our problems are. I will start with funding. Funding is a major problem to women, both women organization and women generally, especially in programming. Funding is very, very difficult to access funding for women programs, going through maybe the government side and also women in humanitarian activities. So funding is a very big problem. And then there is the administrative bottlenecks. Women are not really given every hand or every opportunity to really do administrative duties that will really help other women in aspiring very well. We also have low government support from the extent I stand. Governments are very women development to change now, although things are beginning to change now, but we also have the community buy-in in the issues that relate to SGBV. The community are very low. I mean, the acceptance of the community to understand that GBV has to be dealt with is very low. And then there are cultural issues also embedded in all these our problems. And I think going forward, what we can do is to make sure that we give more accessibility to source of available fundings for women organizations, for women, and for agencies that are also participating in the development of women activities, like maybe the Women Affairs and other human rights activists. We also have capacity building to really build the capacity of these organizations, and we would love to have like trips to other countries that will really make us share experiences, have the first-hand information of what is happening there and how we can really develop us over here. There is also the need for us to increase in every of our programming, increase sensitization and awareness creation on this SGBV for the community, for SGBV to be swept under the carpet, and then for things to be handled well, for every woman to have her rightful place in the communities. Thank you very much.
Yes, and I think bouncing off of what Hasna said regarding the cultural challenges, Palestinian women face many barriers, including the patriarchal societal stigma in many areas in Palestine that refuse women's leadership and participation. Traditional male attitudes specifically is another challenge that results in the notion that women should be separate from the public sphere and their only place is in the household. The occupation, on the other hand, causes a geographical divide that excludes women's participation in society and from having the freedom of movement, which prevents women's community-based organizations from networking properly and lobbying for women's participation in conflict prevention and peace-building efforts on a larger scale. In addition, there are no laws in Palestine that include the participation of women, such as the elections. The elections is such a big problem here because the female quota is only 26%, despite a recommendation to have at least 30% of electoral seats held by women. In addition, the lack of economic empowerment and inequalities in wages are also affecting women's participation in peace efforts. They keep them dependent on their male relatives. Not having a job, the lack of economic independence will always leads to less decision-making power for women in their communities. So what we would say is that we would love to improve the quality of the funding available for women's organizations. This includes providing institutional funding, like Hasna said, for them to build their capacity in advocacy or lobbying, to access technical training, international exposure like this forum today, as well as access to longer-term funding. There are so few funding opportunities for women's organizations in Palestine. And often the available ones are short-lived and they do not allow us to sustain the results or establish a long-term collaboration with other women's organizations who serve the same purpose. New funding opportunities should be made accessible and available in languages that are understood by the community-based organizations at the local level. Also, continuity of the funding is very key for the sustainability of the projects. But beyond the funding, we need to provide opportunities for Palestinian women to network with the international community, to exchange their experiences with the women and the women's movements from other cultures. It will enable the women who have lived their whole lives here under occupation and who cannot move to understand their capabilities and the possibilities that women have ahead to make a change. Having that to be a model for the women here will create such sustainable change that are not just shown on the local and national level, but also within the households, woman to woman, woman to her house. So that is what I would recommend. And those are the challenges that we face every day.
Thank you, Hayat. I want to share that in the situation that I shared with you, in a very dark situation that is already in Afghanistan. This was the women of Afghanistan that they were not silent and they raised their voice with lots, even they face with lots of threat, risk for their safety, for their life for their family life. So women of Afghanistan are not silent. We are going to continue our struggle. We want to bring change in the situation of all women in Afghanistan. We don't want that our daughters and also our sisters experience the situation that we passed and we experienced during the 1996 and 2001 in Afghanistan. So we are still alive, and we will continue our struggle, advocacy, and lobby, and also fighting to provide spaces and the opportunity for our new generation in the country. And as you are the witness that these were the women of Afghanistan that they protested in the past 2 months. These were the women of Afghanistan that they demonstrated and they asked for their rights, for their basic rights, that there isn't any prevention, and not in the Islamic laws, and also not in the international convention, like the right for education, the right for work, and also the right for women political participation. So we are going to continue our struggles, and we are going to organize another protest and demonstration by women in the country. And the things that international community and the different countries can do right now with women of Afghanistan, especially for those women that they are in front line and women HRD. I think the first things for now regarding to 3025 resolution is about protection of women. Unfortunately, now women are living in a very horrible situation in Afghanistan, and it is very important that how we can save their lives and also their family lives, because nowadays we have different cases of killing and targeting women activists and also main civil society activists in Afghanistan. Unfortunately, they killed a large number of women and men during the past 2 decades. So protection is very, very important, and I am asking from international communities and also programs that like WPHF that they provide the opportunity of for protection and evacuation of women, especially those women that they are leaders of frontline and they are still in risk in the country. And inside of this, as I mentioned you before, lots of women lost their jobs, their work, and they don't have any income. So it is very important that they should provide opportunity to support woman-led organization regarding to implementation of 1325 resolution. If we have some specific program for implementation of 1325 resolution, then we can find opportunity of work and income for some women that they are in the country and they are facing with lots of economic problem as well. And also it is very important to have some large term and long time support to woman-led organizations that are working. And also it is very important that there should be the international community and also different donors and organizations should provide the opportunity of meeting of women leaders, women activists with Taliban. We several times asked from the Taliban that we want to meet with their leaders. Unfortunately, they didn't accept because they don't want to talk with women of Afghanistan. And I am asking from international community that they should provide this kind of opportunity to that woman leader meet with the Taliban and ask with them their demands face to face, and ask them that what is their narration from the Islam and the protection of women's rights under Islam, that they have their own narration from the Islam, and also providing of a scholarship opportunity for our young generation, young girls that they needed. They have lots of need for a scholarship to continue their skills and education. And this situation that in Afghanistan there isn't any opportunity for education and also to continue their education. So this is the things that I think that international community, especially program like WPH, can provide for women of Afghanistan.
Thank you, Zarka. Thank you, Zarka, also Ayat and Husna. First, for keeping the women, peace and security agenda alive in your communities, despite all the backlashes you have been encountering, and also for giving us a glimpse of the range of complex challenges you face. I am sure our voices have not fallen on deaf ears today, and that the representatives of the different member states and entities and donors joining us today will take them into consideration. Let me now turn to Sanam Naragi Anderlini, the founder and executive director of the International Civil Society Action Network, ICAN, and also INGO board member of the WPHF. And I would like to ask Sanam, usually donors often talk about the risks of channeling funds directly to local women's organizations in conflict and crisis countries, and tend to add more procedures and limitations on financing. But if donors fail to fund and reach its local and grassroots organization, isn't that worse? I think we would be risking rolling back all the progress we had made so far. So I would like you to tell us more about those risks and who are the ones who are most impacted. Also, how do you think the international community can ensure uninterrupted, flexible, and also quality funding for women and women's organizations on the front lines of conflict and crisis?
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. Many questions, little time, so I will keep it relatively brief. It's a joy to be here with you with so many friends. And from the outset, I want to thank my friends and colleagues from the government of Canada, Germany, Norway, and others who have really been supportive of our work at ICAN over the past few years and supportive of the Innovative Peace Fund, which we established as a mechanism. I also wanted to talk here today on behalf of not only ICAN, but also GPPAC. We have both been organizations that have been civil society representatives on the board of the WPHF for the last 3 years and really seen the growth of this new mechanism, and certainly are keen to make sure that it ends up being a mechanism that is responsive to the challenges on the grounds and it can be as flexible as possible. With regard to the questions that you asked me, what is the risk of funding? You know, I've heard this for 20 years, that our appetite for risk is limited in terms of funding women's organizations on the ground. And my answer is what I've seen and what my own partners have said to me often. Who is taking what risk? In the last 4 years, 5 years, we have had partners in Iraq who have been fighting for basic things like water and electricity and have been trying to keep young men out of violent extremism, and their own relatives have paid the price. We have people who are in jail now in Kashmir for the simple act of participating in a public forum like this with the Security Council and calling for dialogue. We have partners who are under surveillance, under threat, who had been forced to leave their country. So the first question we have to ask is, who exactly is taking what risk when we're talking about these fragile contexts? And I can tell you 1,000% over and over again that it is women on the front lines who are taking those risks, far more than any government ever does. And certainly with the amounts of money that we are channeling to women, the amount of money that could be put at risk, which by the way, it's a kind of an implicit way of saying, are they incompetent? Is there corruption? Is there terrorism? What is it when we say, what is the risk, right? The amounts of money that we're putting is really nothing compared to the lives that are actually being dedicated to peace building. So I think that's something to have some humility around for all of us. So second question is, what's the risk of not funding? And that's also a really good question, because the risk of not funding, I think, is also tied to the risk of not including. Giving a little bit of money is not enough, to be honest with you. You know, $10,000, $20,000, $100,000. It is not enough if it becomes a tick box exercise, which is then used as an excuse to keep Afghan women, Yemeni women, Cameroonian women, peace builders, etc., out of the places and the rooms and the spaces where negotiations are happening about their futures, about their lives, right? And the risk of not funding, the risk of not supporting, is actually the rise of extremists. One of the reasons why we have the Taliban in power now and a resurgence of extremist forces around the world is precisely because for 10 years, 12 years, we've kept Afghan women peace builders out of the places where negotiations have happened. And this will happen over and over again. It's the same with Palestine. I've worked on Palestine since 1996. We've had generation after generation of Palestinian women, Israeli women, they've been kept out. What's the cost? The cost is to the next generation. The cost is more violence. So that's the risk of not funding and enabling, but the funding and the participation go together. How do we do it better? Frankly, we set up the Innovative Peace Fund at ICAN for the simple reason that when I was scanning the horizon in 2004, we saw that that governments were saying they wanted to fund women's peace organizations. There were no real mechanisms, and international multilateral mechanisms that existed at the time were tied to member states. Somehow governments were involved. There was a politics involved in it in terms of which countries, which organizations do you tell, do you not? So we wanted an independent fund. That was one thing. Second thing is that what we've now seen over time is that, as Jackie said, there are rules and regulations about governmental funding that come from parliaments, about public resources and taxpayers' money and so forth that have to be accounted for. This is absolutely valid and very true. And I hope to God that level of scrutiny is put towards the money that goes into the defense sector, towards the money that goes to the private sector contractors, because as non-profit organizations, we are under much greater scrutiny, at least in the United States, than private sector contractors. And the money that goes into the defense sector, into the Pentagon, for example, they can't even do an audit of the Pentagon. And this has been year after year. So what we would like to see is at least a level of fairness. And the taxpayers' question, I think, is absolutely valid. It is our taxes, those of us who pay taxes, we want to know where our money goes and so forth. That said, I also think that we have to think about what are the burdens that we are putting on local organizations, including private, NGOs like ours, in terms of channeling these resources, especially to conflict areas, especially in times of crisis. And I want to remind everybody that when COVID hit in the last 2 years, our major governments around the world became quasi-dysfunctional. Everybody was in crisis. Everybody was at home. They didn't know how to deal with things, what was going on, et cetera, et cetera. All sorts of new rules or flexibility was provided, which was fantastic. And that's actually a good lesson to take forward. We should take that as a benefit of the COVID years. But it was very telling for those of us who work in conflict and fragile settings, because we are dealing, our partners, and ICAN as an organization that has partners in 40 fragile countries, a context, we're dealing with multiple crises every day, right? So there is conflict and then COVID comes, there's conflict and then the Beirut blast goes, and then there's no electricity, and then there's a flood or an earthquake or an attack or a coup. Our partners are consistently dealing with crises, and yet they're being asked to behave and plan and report as if they're in a non-crisis setting. That's the shift that needs to happen. Right? It's one thing asking me sitting in Washington for receipts and for regular updates on an administrative basis for my reports. It's another thing asking a Syrian partner of mine to give all of their receipts and all of their little taxi, where did they go? And that kind of documentation can be dangerous for them. So we have to have some flexibility between making sure that people are accountable and at the same time making sure that we are trusting them. If they are putting their lives on the line, is a taxi receipt really going to make a difference? Right? So there has to be some flexibility. Last year, we produced a report called Funding Women Peacebuilders, together with GPPAC and the Global Network for Women Peacebuilders. We've produced a report on funding peacebuilders. We have really detailed examples of what can be done better. And I would really recommend everybody, if we're serious about changing the way things are done. And I would end with this, that one of the things that we see is private sector donors, philanthropists, individual donors, et cetera, have far less requirements in terms of, because it's not taxpayer money, right? It's their money, they want to give it, and they're happy with different forms of accountability. But to have private money going into public sector institutions, and the public sector institutions then adding layers and layers and layers of administrative bureaucracy on us, and putting the burden of responsibility and the risk on us and our partners, that is not a viable system. That will crash and fail horrifically. So we really need to look at how private philanthropy is enabling resourcing to the local communities, and learn from that, balance it with what public sector requires, but enable that flexibility and think about where the partnerships are. And I will end with one last thought. Afghanistan is a harbinger for many things to come. It's not just a problem of Afghanistan. This is a new world that we're entering in. To that, together with COVID, have shown that funding local entities is absolutely critical. The international community is absent. We need the local organizations to be able to function, work, provide services, and do a lot of the mediation and social cohesion that nobody else is doing. So we have to use the mechanisms that we have to get money rapidly, to get it flexibly, to enable them to do their work without layers and layers of bureaucracy on top of them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sanam, for these really valuable insights. I feel like the solutions you shared, combined with our civil society speakers' recommendations, have left the various actors present today with key elements to take into consideration. I think accelerating financial support for local women's organizations is a common theme of today's interventions, which is the perfect transition to sharing more about an exciting campaign that was launched by the Women's Peace and the Humanitarian Fund this past year, which is the WPHF 1000 Women Leaders campaign, which was aiming to mobilize more flexible and quality funding for local women's organizations and women human rights defenders working in conflict and the crisis around the world. We will now share the closing remarks of Ms. Åsa Ragnar, Assistant Secretary General and also Deputy Executive Director of UN Women and Board Chair of WPHF, to tell you more about the WPHF 1000 Women Leaders campaign.
Excellencies, UN colleagues and civil society partners. It's my honor to join you on behalf of UN Women and the United Nations Women, Peace and Humanitarian Fund, a global partnership that is re-energizing action and accelerating support to women's civil society on the front lines. As board chair and host to the fund's global secretariat, I'm particularly proud of the role that UN Women plays in its continued growth, which is channeling urgently needed financing to local women's organizations in 26 crisis and conflict affected countries. I wish to acknowledge the leadership of the fund's government donors, particularly the co-hosts of today's event. They are truly walking the talk through their investment in women, which is yielding remarkable dividends for a more peaceful, inclusive, and gender equal world. We all know from the reflections and experiences shared by the extraordinary women convened here today that local women's organizations deliver results and are engines of progress and transformation on the ground. As the UN Security Council prepares for its annual open debate on women, peace and security next week, we must ensure that the voices, priorities and demands of these women's civil society leaders remain front and center. Around the world, the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund is channeling flexible programmatic and institutional funding for women's CSO responding to humanitarian emergencies and building peace. Local women's organizations reach remote areas where services are often disrupted or even non-existent. They bring deep structural change to address the underlying causes of conflict and inequality, and at the same time, they try to leave no one behind. In Haiti, the fund is supporting women to lead local disaster response and protect displaced women and girls from sexual exploitation and abuse. In Afghanistan, the fund is mobilizing support to channel emergency financing for women peace activists and human rights defenders, providing urgent cash assistance to safely continue their advocacy efforts both inside and outside the country. The work of women at the forefront of crisis is the cornerstone of inclusive and sustainable peace, and they frankly deserve more recognition and support for their contributions and hard work. The UN Secretary General, therefore, has called on the international community to significantly increase direct assistance to women's organizations for peace and gender equality. That is why today the fund is rallying the world to accelerate financing for local women leaders facing the most critical challenges of our generation. And we all know about the difficult situations around the world. Through the 1,000 Women Leaders campaign, the fund aims to mobilize $112 million to support the work of 1,000 local women's organizations in fragile settings by the end of 2025. As a signatory and catalytic member of the Compact on Women, Peace and Security and Humanitarian Action, the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund and its 1,000 Women Leaders campaign is an essential component of its multi-stakeholder movement, driving financing for women on the front lines to deliver transformative change on the ground. Together, we must increase and strengthen our efforts to invest in women on the front lines who are working so hard to build a more resilient, peaceful, and gender equal world, often under the most dire circumstances and in very difficult contexts. Generation equality is one initiative to support those efforts. Thank you so much for having me, and good luck.
And now this much interesting and informative event have came to an end. I would like to thank again Germany, Canada, Ireland, ICAN, and the Global Partnership for Prevention of Armed Conflict for co-hosting today's event. Also, a special thanks to our amazing speakers, Husna, Ayat, and Zarka, for your valuable work on the ground and for making sustainable peace and inclusive humanitarian action a reality for the countless people in your communities. And also, I would like to thank Women's Peace and the Humanitarian Fund for convening us today and for accelerating support for local women's organizations and also women's leaders in over 26 countries affected by conflict and the crisis around the world. Now it is time to turn today's words into concrete action. So we call on you to join us to accelerate the support for Women Peace Humanitarian Fund and 1,000 women's leaders on the front lines. Together we can make it happen. We leave you now with the final words from another WPHF civil society partner from the DRC, Naula, and thank you again all for joining us.
Les premières personnes qui sont touchées directement par les conflits, ce sont les femmes. Dès qu'il y a ces groupes armés arrivent dans une communauté, les hommes s'en vont et ils laissent la femme souvent derrière. Vous savez, nous les femmes, on ne peut pas aller quelque part, on laisse nos enfants derrière. Moi, je suis Madame Noëlla Alifoua. Je viens de la République démocratique du Congo. J'œuvre pour les relèvements des victimes de violences sexuelles. Avec la situation actuelle des conflits, nous organisons des cliniques mobiles. Nous allons soigner, surtout dans les cas de déplacés dans les territoires. Si la femme subit les violences sexuelles, ça c'est une façon de détruire la femme. Quand vous approchez une femme qui a été agressée, c'est à ce moment-là que vous allez comprendre que ce n'est pas facile. Il y a des femmes qui nous arrivent, elles viennent d'abord et commencent à vous dire « Moi, je préférerais mourir que vivre ». Pour redonner la vie à ces femmes, souvent ce n'est pas aussi facile. Hein? Les activités que nous organisons à leur attention, c'est la journée de réflexion ou bien la journée d'échange. Quand elles parlent entre elles, ces femmes arrivent à comprendre qu'elles elles doivent se relever. Que c'est une situation qui leur est arrivée et que c'est une situation qui peut passer. Nous ajoutons à cela les activités de réinsertion socio-économique. C'est très important, puisque souvent ces femmes-là, quand elles vivent cette situation, elles sont abattues, elles sont découragées. On doit chercher à leur donner les moyens pour faire les activités génératrices, soit des revenus ou bien l'apprentissage de métiers. Ça fait partie aussi des relèvements de ces femmes. Avec tout le travail que nous faisons, il y a des femmes qui comprennent déjà que quand on parle des droits humains, la femme est inclue là-dedans. La femme aussi a droit à la vie. Quand je décide quelque chose, je ne baisse pas le bras. J'aime toujours atteindre les objectifs que je me suis fixés. Malgré les difficultés, je vais de l'avant. Quand je vois celles qui se relèvent, qui quittent leur état de traumatisme et qu'elles peuvent se dépasser, qu'elles peuvent commencer une nouvelle vie, moi, c'est ça ma fierté. Et je me dis souvent, ok, j'ai réussi. Ok, j'ai fait un bon travail.